Yeah. Welcome. And honestly, what we're going to try and do in the next 45 minutes is give you as many of the big ticket items of stuff you got to concern yourself about if you're a comic book creator, comic book publisher, or just interested in doing those things. So let me get a quick show of hands. How many people are comic book creators here? You can be an illustrator, you can be a writer, okay? Any publishers? Okay. Anybody sitting around waiting for Nathan Fillion because he's not on this panel?
He is not. He is not. There is no one with the Guy Gardner bowl cut on this panel.
So, those of you who haven't been to these panels before, my name is Thomas Kroll. I'm an attorney. I teach law at community law. I'm an out-of-pocket lawyer for comic book creators. And I think probably the most important thing to know about me is that I was a creator for many years before I became an attorney. So I speak geek and I speak.
Hi, I'm Keith Walker. I'm an entertainment, comic book, and labor attorney. I was also a contributor to the Pocket Lawyer for filmmakers and for comic book creators. And I'm just happy to be here and teach you guys some comic book law.
Hi, my name is Joseph Village. I'm a veteran writer and editor of comics for 32 years. I worked at Milestone. I worked on Batman, Heavy Metal Magazine. Right now I'm writing for Todd McFarlane Productions, DC Comics, HarperCollins for a second, and I started my own company called Illuminous, which provides editorial and IP consultation services to clients, creators, and companies.
And so one of the things that I'm really excited about having Joseph on the panel today is because he's been in the trenches for years, and you know what it's like from the artist's perspective, from the writer's perspective, and also from the business owner's perspective. So hopefully we have a range of points of view that we're going to get today. And I will start by saying that because some of us are lawyers on this panel, this is not legal advice. Here in our capacity as law professors, not as your attorney, and this actually helps you because when we get to the ample Q&A time that we're going to have, you're going to have some questions. I really encourage you not to do this. So anyway, I took something from online that I don't have the rights to, and because there's no confidentiality here. And we may represent the person who you just admitted that you so it's really for your benefit, okay? So we'll just, what if somebody took something online and didn't get permission? It's much better. That way I don't have to assume that it was you who took my client's work. Well, we're going to hold the questions until the end, and as I said, we're going to have an ample time for that, at least 15 minutes for just the Q&A on this stuff, and you know, hit us with whatever you want to that has to do with what we've talked about. You know, no real estate advice is going to be discussed here. And today we're really going to be focusing on, again, those big ticket items that every creator and publisher needs to be aware of if you're going to enter this crazy world of comic book publishing. I'm going to start with something just to end with, because I want to contextualize things. I want you to have, and feel free to take out your phone, snap these slides if you feel it's helpful. I'll put them all up there on the board at once. I'm going to run down very quickly the top 10 legal tips for comic book creators. And then we're going to go in and explain why they're the top 10 legal tips, right? First, understand the concept of work for hire. You know, if you only have a smattering of history of comic book law, you know that so many of the best and brightest artists and writers were on the wrong side of a work for hire contract. And they lost the rights to some of the greatest properties in comic book. So we're going to unpack for you what work for hire is, how to be aware of it, how to form it if you're a company, how to avoid it if you're a client, if you're a creator. Also, register your work with the U.S. Copyright Office. This is so simple to do. You guys, how simple is registering a copyright?
No, it's easy. You know, I asked my lawyer, how does the process work? The lawyer handled it, I paid for it, and very little paperwork that you have to fill out, and then one day you get the certificate, and you know, hey, like this is officially copyrighted, but It took like 30 minutes.
And you might not even need a lawyer, but hiring lawyers are good because lawyers like money as well. But you can, if you can read a PDF and if you can fill out a form, circa Netscape 1995, that's what it looks like these days, and watch videos, you can fill out a copyright registration.
Yeah, and save hundreds of dollars. So really is the type of thing where if you do this before you put your, before your work is out there, then you have far greater protections. Know your leverage in a negotiation. That one takes a little time to sort of figure out, but basically your worth in a negotiation, don't overstate it, but also don't undercut yourself. And I know when you talk through things, Joseph, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of advice on that for us. Ideas are not protected by copyright. So every year we get a question, so how do I copyright my idea? And then one of us, depending on how snarky we feel, goes, oh, you can. So I want to avoid that. You can't copyright an idea. And you can copyright a work of expression, like a writing on a page that is developed to a certain degree, but if it's just a concept like, hey, how about a team of superpowered individuals, they protect the world from like an alien invasion or something, man? Nothing, there's no protection that is good, because I have to start inventing characters and plot lines and actually putting some stuff on top of it. AI can create copyright issues. Let me say this again. AI is bad to use if you want to protect your work. Now, we may have all have aesthetic reasons, and the best of humanity is not in AI, it's in our hearts. We may have other good, feel-good reasons, but as a lawyer, to me, the best reason not to use it is it messes with your ownership. Why?
Because you can't protect something that you've stolen, basically. And the AI is trained on infringing works. So you can't protect something that you've stolen.
And there's another reason too, which is copyright law doesn't recognize works of non-human authorship. So if the best part of your book is done by the Stilo machine, the AI, then copyright law looks at it and goes, that ain't yours, man. You didn't author that. It was essentially a really, really sophisticated sorting and search engine that can put parts of things together, but that wasn't a human that came up with it, so no protection. Now, I'm going to point out later there are ways to actually register a copyright for works with some AI in it. But if the mainstay of your work has been created with AI, you've lost the ability to protect it. Email chains can create a contract. Ooh, okay, so what? Well, here's the so what. If you and I are back and forth and I'm a writer and I'm trying to hire Joseph as an illustrator, actually it would be reversed, and we have back and forth a discussion which includes one of us saying, hey, for this amount of money, can you do this thing for me? And then you go, yeah. And I go, great, can you start Monday? And you go, yeah. Guess what? It may not have been written and signed, but there's a contract.
And there are enough terms and conditions. So, yeah, that's a contract.
If you work with somebody, a buddy, husband, wife, college roommate, and you are working together to do a project like a comic book, even if you haven't written down an agreement or anything, formed a company, you're just kind of working together to do it, you can find yourselves suddenly being general partners in a partnership. Okay, so that sounds pretty cool. Well, what that means is that if your partner does something in service of the comic book, like, I don't know, buys a really expensive computer system and then defaults on paying credit card payments, then you can be looked at to cover the debts incurred during the general partnership. What does that mean for you? It means if you're going to work with someone on a thing, get it in writing who owns what, who pays for what, how the debts are taken care of, and make sure you know the scope of that relationship, or else you can really be on the wrong side of a suit from a creditor. Have work scheduled. And you're going to work with somebody, you must deal with the schedule. Joseph, in all the things you've dealt with in all your many, many years, how important is having a schedule with your collaborators?
It's really crucial because Without structure, creators have their own opinions about urgency, right? We all have different opinions about it. For some people, there is no urgency, right? Because it's a creative process and it's, when the muse speaks to me, when I catch the moment and it's like, but we're not gonna make the next Walking Dead that way, right? So a schedule is crucial and it keeps things moving in a way that everyone knows that this has a degree of seriousness. We're treating this like work. We're not treating this like a hobby. If you're talking about we have a general partnership, that means we're engaged in a business and we're treating our creative works like a business.
And I will say anecdotally that the times in which I have been tapped in to solve problems in a partnership is almost always been because one person is not working to the schedule that the other person, or giving the deliverables that the other person thought that they should be.
That's right.
So even though it doesn't sound like these are legal things, they do break the relationships more than something that may sound more legal.
And get it in writing, and all of these situations, you're preventing problems in the future, legal problems in the future, partnership problems in the future.
Yeah, it's perspective. Understand the difference between an exclusive and a non-exclusive license. This is really, really relevant. If you are going to be producing a comic book and you want a publishing company to pick it up and print it and make a floppy, you need to recognize that what they're requiring from you is the exclusive right to do that. That means that you need to tell them if you've done a Kickstarter, and more importantly, you need to not put copious amounts of it online and start ruining that exclusivity. So Joseph, is that anything you've had to deal with or in your...
Definitely, in my capacity as an editor and editor-in-chief, I've been on the side of the contract creators. And number one, a contract is usually created in favor of the side that's generating the contract. So if you're on the other side of it, it's not designed to be in your favor. And when you're talking about licenses, read carefully, because licenses could go into double-digit decades. Licenses can go into a place where even if regular publication of your intellectual property, shared intellectual property, is suspended, that license could still be going on for a period of time. So this is a part you're going to want to pay attention to.
And a license, just to be a little bit more clear as to what it does, is it's the right to take the copyright of the comic book that you've created and to use one of the copyright rights, which is the ability to duplicate it, and another one to distribute it. And you need to say to the company, you're the only one who gets to do those things for this period of time, right? And the period of time, as Joseph said, is also relevant, because you don't have an eye on that. You may end up signing something that looks like, oh, it's just a license, it's just temporary, and it'll say the life of the copyright, and then suddenly, wait a minute. The other thing about licenses to note is that publishing companies like to play games with definitions. So it could say, we get the rights to publish your comic book, the comic book rights, and then define the comic book rights as comic book rights include movie rights. And the minute you've defined it as comic book rights, a defined term, and you see it all throughout the contract, sure, if you go to the beginning and go, wait a minute, it's movie rights too, but most people don't do that, right? Most people are going to just assume that the word that they're reading at the moment is the normal term. And so watch your definitions, because the definitions are where we like to get you. We will absolutely know techniques like putting something in a very easy to read paragraph up front, which is very laudatory. Because of the skill and understand place that you have in the comic book community, Joseph, we are proud to give you an offer, because it is so wonderful to be working with Joseph and to have Joseph. We'll be on it for all time.
This is the butter up stage.
Yes. Get it in writing, obviously, you don't need a lawyer to tell you that, but it is important to anything that affects the copyright of the work, whether it's working with somebody else, or hiring somebody else, or transacting with a publishing company and saying you have this right to publish it. All of those things must be signed by the person who owns the copyright. You cannot grant an exclusive license without a signed writing from the person who owns that copyright. It is impossible. One of the nice things about copyright law is it actually has some cut and dry in it. It also has a lot of ambiguity, which we'll get into later, like fair use. But there are some black letter rules, which is what we say in law, where we say this is, everybody agrees to this. And one of them, and it's in the statute, is you have to get it in writing. What I want to do now is I want to spend a few minutes and I want to walk you guys through the general scope of how comics are created, you know, and so Joseph, I'm going to tap you at a button time.
All right.
Okay, you know, what do creators need to know, and Chief, especially with the labor law stuff, and so here we go. I think we have to situate the discussion first by saying there are three different general ways in which a comic book is created. A publisher-owned comic, which is like Marvel, DC, they own these characters. You are never going to be hired by Marvel to write Daredevil and keep any part of that. The one exception is a special character. What's a special character license? A special, when you create a unique character for a publishing company, and they're like, okay, we're going to turn that into a series.
Oh, interesting. Are you talking about the kind of like getting into the like the character equity agreement? Yes.
Let's speak on that.
So, one of the big two publishers that I've written for, kind of like, you know, this is one of the great things about being part of a community. I had a writer who also worked for that publisher and said to me, hey, did you ask for a character equity agreement? I said, what's that? Right? Basically, if you created or co-created a new character for this corporate superhero universe, that character appears in any other form or media, you should get some kind of, you know, breakup. Like here, you know, in gratitude for co-creating this character who appeared in the Injustice video game, here's a check, right? And so, having been told that, the company did not tell me that. So then I asked the editor, hey, by the way, can I get one of those? And that question I had to ask multiple times. I did it very kindly. I was like, hey, by the way, can I get one of those? And then I did, and myself and the artist who co-created the character signed it. And that way, we had that in writing, and we knew. But it was something, again, the company did not tell me about. It was people in the community that told me.
Secret behind the counter.
There are many.
And it's important to know, I didn't read the contract that he signed, but I read variations of it from DC and Marvel, and it's not an ownership, right? You don't own that character.
Not one iota of the
Right.
character. It is theirs 100%.
It's just about money. So you're going to get compensated if it's in, you know, like I think Deadpool may be one of those characters. I could be wrong.
Oh yeah. I mean, well, Liefeld has a very
Yeah.
particular deal with Deadpool. It's not the average deal.
But it's about money when you get one of these contracts. It's not about ownership. You know, Joseph has no right to take whatever character is subject to it and then do his own comic book unless he asks Marvel for permission to do that. But he'll get money pursuant to what that contract says. So publish your own contracts, publish your own characters. You're not going to own anything at the end of the day. So you better be focused on the money you're going to make and the publicity and the extent to which you can take those characters and say, hey, look at me, I did this thing. Hey, guys, you know, publicity aspects and the credit aspects. It becomes a different framing of a negotiation of what you're there to do. The creator-driven contracts are comic books, are the ones in which a creator has made it and maybe with a partner and then has approached a publishing company, and the publishing company has said, hey, yeah, okay, all right, we can do this. But the IP, the copyright, starts with the creators and then maybe gets transferred over to the publishing company more than the creators want sometimes. So So the big leverage point, the big inflection point there for these deals is making sure you understand what rights are being given to the publisher, what they're gonna do with them, and how much you're gonna get for those rights.
Yep. And to be clear, from the publisher's perspective, because, obviously if a writer and artist come up with something 100%, they take it to a publisher, and the publisher says, okay, but we want, some of the IP rights across all media. Obviously the creators are going to be uncomfortable with that at first, but from the publisher's perspective, based on the duration of this project, they could end up investing as much as, 6 figures in this, right? To pay the creators publicity, marketing, distribution, printing. So there is no situation in which a company is going to say, we're going to invest all of this so that you can get everything. They want their return on investment. And so that's what it is. But and then there's area for negotiation in terms of the numbers. But to be clear, from their perspective, they're making a sizable investment in your idea becoming a reality. They want their return on investment.
And then finally, we have the creator-owned and distributed model, which is you create the comic book, maybe you do a Kickstarter, you do the deal itself with Webtoons or whoever, and you're the one who's doing the legwork on the marketing and the distribution end of it, and you might be tapping in a couple of smaller digital distributors, maybe you put it on Amazon, but it's basically you are doing the work of the creative team and of the editorial and of the publishing team. You're the one who's doing it all. And from a rights perspective, yeah, you hold on to all the rights, which, yay. But from a work perspective, you're doing twice, if not 3 times the work. And do you have experience doing that? And how does it?
100%. So I have 2 situations involving creator-owned ideas. One is there is an independent publisher. They are dedicated to publishing stories that the creators maintain their rights of. They tend to do anthology graphic novels or anthology comics. These things tend to be crowdfunded. So that's a publisher that myself and my co-creator, Chris Cross, that he and I started at Milestone. He's done all the big characters. We have a story running through there, and we own it 100%. Right? And so that's a really comfortable thing. But the fact of the matter is, if you own something, then yes, you have to start wearing different hats, right? Because, quite frankly, when it comes to publishers and PR and marketing, they're very limited. And depending upon the size of the company, where does yours rate? So you have to be prepared to do more. The second situation is that a co-writer and I that have produced a comic work for hire for another company, we are setting up, we got the green light for a creator-owned series, which will be coming out hopefully 3rd quarter next year. And one of the first things that I did is I said, okay, I made a chart. Who are all the people that need to be involved? What are their page rates? What will be the cost per issue? And we're paying for all of that. So that is a situation where you have to invest in yourself to manifest something, because even when it gets published, the publisher is going to want to recoup initial costs that they put in. So you're wearing all the hats, like you are really a business, and think of yourself that way.
We're going to walk through in a little bit more detail the stages of producing a comic book that is either one that is creator-driven or creator-owned. Obviously, if you're working for Marvel, you don't need to worry about setting up an LLC unless it's to protect you from anything that Marvel might come and get you. But this first stage, and this is really sort of, I read this from a lawyer perspective, this is what I think when you come into my office and say, hey, I have a comic book idea, I want to do a thing, what do I do? So very often I will have essentially a strategy discussion with the client, saying, okay, what is it you want to do? You tell me. I don't want to presume it, and I want to get a sense of who the players are and what has been created, because I need to know what has been created outside of a contract, and what has been created, what are you looking to create after you have all of the proper ducks in a row? Because I have to deal with those two scenarios differently, because my job as the attorney helping the creator is going to be to make sure that you get to keep as much of your rights as possible until such time as you're ready to sell them for as much as possible. And so I'm trying to keep track of all the little things that may have fallen by the wayside, and the answer almost always is do that by contract. The other answer is have a company that everybody works for. It's an LLC, and we may all be members for it. We might we might all work for it, but the LLC being the owner of all of the rights in that property. Now, you spent some time setting up LLCs and stuff like that. What when you're doing an LLC, when you're thinking about these thoughts, Chief, what would you suggest that a creator be looking to, at this point?
Setting up the LLC? Well, it also depends on how many people are going to be involved, who's going to control, what the members' responsibilities are going to be, and then what happens when it needs to be broken up. If all of the people involved in controlling it may not want to continue with the company, and that also has to be explained. But also, minimum, you should figure out where you want the LLC to be formed.
Where you're forming it, what state, and there's a contract that controls the LLC itself, an operating agreement. So really what I'm trying to convey is that there are a lot of steps to this process, but if you're going to be working with people, and especially if you're going to be hiring people, I'm not talking about a contract with a collaborator, I'm talking about hiring an employee. That's a very different legal scenario that you will talk about in a moment. And if you're doing that, I think it is better if you have a limited liability entity that protects your assets from whatever mistakes you make, the company might make, essentially.
Don't want anyone coming after your house, is what you're saying.
And they can and they will. The other things in this stage is you really want to get a creation log, especially if you're using AI, which again I'm saying you should not, but if you choose to, you need to keep track of what is AI and what isn't when it comes to copyright registration, because the Copyright Office needs to know that. At this point, it's really about the strategy of how you're going to create the company. But it very quickly pivots to a discussion of chain of title. Now, what chain of title is a hopefully unbroken chain of ownership from the author who created the book all the way down to the toy licensee that may have the right to make an action figure exclusively for a period of time. And our job as attorneys is to keep track of all those links in the chain and to make sure that there's no breaks in them. So getting the right agreements in place is super important. So when you're dealing with copyrights, you want to get a registration as quickly as possible, and you need to tell the Copyright Office if you've used AI. But copyrights are also affected by who you're working with and who are the people who are creating the portions of your copyright. If it's a collaborator, then you may find out that without the right agreement, you have a joint author who also has a right to control the work. If you want somebody to call you the author even though they're doing the work and you want to work for hire agreement, well, there are a lot of steps you've got to go through that may sound counterintuitive. Point being, at the earliest possible moment, you need to know how each element of that comic is being created, and from a legal perspective, how it is adding a link to that chain. And just to go over it in brief, and then I want to sort of dive down and talk about some of the different contracts, collaboration agreements, what work for hire looks like. The way that we acquire things, like copyright, is driven by the law. Now, if you're not an attorney, you may not be familiar with going and reading legal statutes, and they are absolutely the driest stuff in the world. I kid you not, I tell my law students every semester that the thing that separates us from normal people is not that we're smarter and cooler and look great in a suit.
You understand the statutes?
No, it's that we have a greater tendency to deal with boring, stupid minutia. It really is that. That's the difference. you know, we could keep our eyes open a little bit longer. So if you want to, these are the statutes that control how to convey a copyright, but I'll just break it down for you. You got to get it in writing. You got to have it signed by the person who is the author. But none of that matters if we don't have the right contract structure. So, Chief, let me turn to you here. We have a comic book that we're trying to put together. We may be the writer and we need visual stuff. What are the kinds of contract and structures? And just let's talk about generally, and then I can dive into the slides of the, of the individual, how you do that. Okay. But just talk to me about the concept.
So the big decision is independent contractor versus employee. So if you are hiring someone full-time as an employee and you are controlling their schedule and you are telling them when to show up and what to do and when to be finished by and all of those deadlines, there's a greater likelihood that under the law they would be considered an employee. And any work they do for you as a default would be a work for hire. So that person that you are hiring, even though they are creating the work at your insistence, they would not own anything. You as the hiring party would own all of it. The other choice is an independent contractor, and an independent contractor will most likely have their own business, will most likely take the assignment that you've given them and they will return it at their deadline and they will, or their schedule. And there are, at that point, they, with an independent contractor agreement, you need to specify and have them transfer the rights to what they're doing, because the chance is what they are doing, they will end up owning.
And let's sort of break that down, because that's exactly right. There are basically two ways to deal with somebody that you're engaging who's not a partner or a collaborator. And work for hire, we're sort of talking about here. And there are really two magic ways of getting there. One is you have the employee, as she said, and before we go into that, is an employee an independent contractor an employee? What's the difference?
It's a binary thing generally, but an employee there are very specific criteria states use to determine the misclassification is very common, and that can be problematic both financially and legally.
But if somebody's taking out if there's a W-2 in play, if they have the right to say, leave that work that I gave you yesterday and do this new one, and I think you said this, the more they can control your day-to-day work, the more likely it is that you're an employee. So if you are an employee and you are hired to do a specific type of thing, like you're an employee and you're hired to do backgrounds in an animation company, then any background you do for that animation company is owned by the company as if the company was the author. But it must be within the scope of what you were hired to do. So if what you were hired to do is do backgrounds for an animation company, and then you write a screenplay on the side, that's not within the scope. But so therefore you should have the copyright to that aside from your employer. But they play games with the scope. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So we've all probably signed an employment agreement at some point, and they will say your job includes but is not limited to, and they will list a whole bunch of things. So if it's broadly drafted that you will create intellectual property for my company in the scope of your employment, let's say you may not have been on your coffee break and you're using a work computer to do the second draft of your screenplay. An argument could be made that the company you're working for as an employee may have a right to that screenplay.
Yep. There's a somewhat known company named Walt Disney, right? And you will hear various stories of animators who thought that if they were in the office and during their lunch break, they were working on their side hustle idea that was going to basically handle their retirement.
Nightmare Before Christmas.
Nope.
Oh, nope.
They did not read their contract carefully enough or at all, and Disney owns that.
Yep.
And it's a big part of the discussion that we lawyers have. Last year, I had a year-long negotiation with one of the big studios who was hiring a writer client of mine who had done a lot of work on animated shows that I guarantee you all have seen. And she's an amazing writer, and the studios wanted to snap her up. But we spent literally a year doing the carve-outs because she had created so much stuff, you know. And Disney was like, well, yeah, you know, anything you created, and it wasn't Disney. That was misspeaking, and it literally wasn't Disney. That there was so much discussion over the carve-outs that literally she had completed her job and left the minute, you know, as we were finishing up the deal. So, so this can be a very big part of what we have to correct for. The other way to get into work for hire is if you're hiring an independent contractor that's someone that she said has her own company, and says, yeah, you know, I will work on yours this week, I'll do John's next week, and Amy's the week after, and okay, tell me how many pages, tell me what you want, great, you got it, now go away, right? That's an independent contractor. If you want their copyright, you have to either get it from them by buying it from them, getting them to assign it to you, or if you want it as a work for hire, which means the law treats you as the author, then you have to get it in writing. It must be a particular kind of contract which says that it is a work for hire. It has to actually call out, use those magic words, and it has to be signed by the person who is doing the actual creation, and it must be done before any of the work starts. Now, there's a bit of a circuit split here, so in New York, yeah, as long as you talk about it and agree that it's a work for hire, you can write the contract afterwards, but the better practice is it's done before any creation starts. But those are the only two ways that it can be work for hire, and if it is that second way, it's still not going to be work for hire if the work doesn't fall within one of these categories. And as you take a quick look, you see movies are included because it says audiovisual work, but comic books aren't here. How can then we have work for hire in comic book? Because it's treated by the law as a collective work. What a collective work is, a work that contains a lot of different parts, and it's the combination of those parts together is what is being protected. So that's work for hire. Be very careful signing a work for hire, or if you're a publishing company, make sure everyone signs a work for hire. It depends upon who you are, the advice I give. The other way that we're going to get somebody's work is if they're actually a contributor with us, and we're treating them more like a partner, in which case they're going to be considered a joint author. So when a joint author, when that pops into place, then we're going to go over a basics of the collaboration agreement, and I want you to walk through what needs to be done. But if you have two or more people who are contributing expressive contributions like writing and illustration, and they both or they all intend for these parts to be merged together, either inseparably where you can't pull them apart, or interdependently like music and lyrics, you know, that go together and create a song. If you have that and you don't have a contract which says otherwise, then each author can say, yeah, not that bit. You know, we can sort of like debate among ourselves. You don't get a right to tell me, I don't have a right to tell you. If that's the scenario, then you have joint authors. Okay, so more the merrier, right? Yeah. Because the rights of a joint author, everybody owns it equally. It's kind of like a house, right? You know, if you and your spouse purchase a house together, you both own 100% of the house, copyright's like that. And if you all get the equal amount of money from the exploitation of the work, it doesn't matter if you did 10 pages and your partner did 100 pages. You split it 50-50 halves of the contract. And there's an equal right to grant non-exclusive licenses, which means that if we haven't talked about it, I could be sending off my comic to, you know, my cousin who's a really bad artist, but you know, and you have very little to say about that, and yet that's going to damage our book, right? And yet, if we're fighting and we want to get and a publisher is suddenly interested, we have to agree in order to sign those rights to the publishing company. And I can't sue you for infringement if we're joint authors. So it's really a bad place to be unless you are absolutely tied to the hip and have a lot of trust in somebody, which means you want a collaboration agreement that controls all this stuff. So walk us through
So as we talked earlier about what group structure will there be, whether it's going to be a partnership, which has its own problems, or an LLC, which has more options. Who is going to own what? Are you going to go with the 50-50, or are you going to go with a different percentage? And working with a partner, obviously, who has the right to approve the work? Who is going to decide when it's done? And then obviously expenses, how the expenses are going to be dealt with. I mean, I should be tossing this to Joseph. I'm just going to go through this. Credits, who's going to be credited for what? Who can license? And obviously the work schedule being the most important that we were talking about.
Yeah, and you know, there's another aspect that really comes into it too, which is, say 2 or 3 people create an intellectual property, but after the first year, one partner bows out, one collaborator bows out, and no longer wants to do any work with it. Depending on the way you set up your agreement, is this person who is no longer doing any work, are they contractually entitled to the same amount of profit in perpetuity, right? Because the life of an intellectual property is directly connected to the length of time that work is put into nurturing and growing and evolving the intellectual property. So that's something to be cognizant of as well.
Right, and then the next is carve-outs for unilateral exploitation. So what if Joseph creates a really good character and he wants to go off and do his own series with it? That should be in the agreement if that's an option. It's entirely possible, it should definitely be in the agreement, I should say. And then derivative works. If I want to then make a movie, I want to write a screenplay of our character, you want to write a stage play or a musical, all of that should be in those agreements. And then something that came up fairly recently, as you talked about, the morality clause. So you are creating a comic book, you're creating a brand, you're creating a company. Things can tarnish that brand, things can disparage that brand. Things that you say on social media can cause issues with your business and your project. And then what happens if it doesn't work out? How do you unwind? How do you distribute the rights or wind down the LLC? And then obviously in big letters, all of it has to be in writing. You know from working with friends, once money's involved, and money will be involved no matter how much or how little, it's better to have it in writing while there's no stakes and everybody knows what things mean.
Basically, if you're partnered with someone and they feel like getting into those layers of a contract is an insult to them personally, make some kind of commentary on your friendship, that may not be the person you want to be in business.
That's excellent advice. That's
Right.
Bill backs that
very
up.
good advice.
Right, because the contract is not for if everything goes well. It's if things go sideways, and your partner should want that, because the more definitive the contract is, the less
more
strife
protection.
and tension will happen if things go sideways. The clarity of the contract can help determine the version of the separation that happens, from short and clean and civil to the exact opposite.
And it's the first best time to get it fair for everyone, because they're all on the same page.
All right, I want to do one last thing before we open up to Q&A, and because I'm going to anticipate this is going to be a question, so I just want to get ahead of it, right? Everybody in this room who's a creator wants to get published. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here a little bit, Joseph. Talk us through what the best way we can sort of get in front of a publishing company and say, hey, look at us, like take my work seriously. What advice do you have for that?
I mean, I think there's basically 2 roads. One is that you have done work for hire work, or even, ownership shared work with an established publisher. So you come with a certain type of credibility and legitimacy, and you can say, hey, I've worked for these companies. I would love to talk to you about possibly doing something for you, right? They can easily look you up and say, okay, those 2 or 3 companies took a chance on this person, then that person is a lower risk. known quantity to you. The second way is, I'll tell you what the worst way is, and I'll get to the second way. The worst way is you have nothing established, and you go to a publisher, and you say, take a chance on me, because I have the coolest fucking idea. Okay? That's not gonna fly. So the second way is, in some way, manifest your idea. Ashcan comic book, web comic, manifest it, and start testing it in the market for a while. So you can go in and say something like, we have this Ashcan comic, this year we've sold 1,000 copies. We have a mailing list of like 500 people. Or we have this web comic, we've been doing 3 panels every week for a year. You can go here, you can see it, right? That establishes a number of things. Number one, your intellectual property is established, and number two, you and your partner are professionals. You're professionals and you're committed. And that will say to a publisher, okay, they're willing to do the work, they've done this for a period of time, they already have some kind of an audience that we can tap into.
Yeah, I want to just underscore a couple things that you said there that's extremely relevant. And this is going to kind of sound, I'm Gen X, so it's going to sound like the life isn't fair kid, right? The Gen X, right? But it's this. Publishing companies truly don't care about how sexy your idea is because they've heard a variation of it. They care about risk. They care about maximizing return. They care about putting their eggs in the basket of someone who's done it before because it's less likely to lose money. It really is that simple. So proving yourself as a professional, as a competent person is just as important as showing a great portfolio.
Yep. And there's another component to this. Do not depend on this. But publishers look at your collective social media influence.
Yes, so do Hollywood studios.
Right? So in there, they're looking for at least 2 things. 1, how many followers do you have? 2, how do you behave? Because if you have 20 million followers, but you really mix it up and you get into some dangerous places, it's like, okay, that person has an audience, but they may wreck it. They may wreck it and damage us, right? So, especially trade book publishers, you're doing a project, like I have an agent, my agent gave me a questionnaire, and the questionnaire involved, how many followers do you have across all of these profiles? Because automatically, marketing and sales want to be able to start calculating, can this person bring in some sizable audience, or if they do something with this, can we broadcast it to a sizable audience? And then in terms of how you represent yourself on social media, connecting this to business, people will rather work with someone who's good, who is a nice person to work with, than someone who's great, who is an asshole.
And socials matter. I know it sucks. It really sucks. But unless you're going to be putting that book out yourself, in which case also socials matter in that case, it matters to studios, it matters to companies. They need to make sure that they're not tying their reputation to somebody who's suddenly going to go off on a political tear, no matter how justified it may be, and then damage the brand of that publishing company.
I mean, we saw an example, unfortunately, recently with a top 2 publisher, with a Batman family comic. And we saw the situation change in 6 hours. Like in 6 hours, it was like, this person said this on this platform, this book is canceled. Retailers, you will be refunded for all your advance orders. Any copies you have, send them back. There's a sampler, and that sampler includes advance pages from this book. Do not distribute that. That happened in like 6, I've never seen it happen that fast. That is the world in which we live. So again, if you are doing work for hire and you're doing it or high power corporation, another thing that they have, a definitive document called a social media policy. And you should read every word of that.
All right, at this point, we're gonna open up to questions. Gotta give 10 minutes, because I know you guys probably have some. Give me a straight hand. First one up there, yellow with no glasses.
Hi, my name is Amy. I'm a partner at a growing indie publisher, and we are finding ourselves in more and more need of making contracts. Apart from hiring a lawyer, do you have any great resources that we could turn to for solid?
Let me open the book, The Pocket Lawyer for Comic Book Creators. Absolutely. Yeah, and you get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
I have a question. When does the drawing become a character? That we can do I draw it, put a name on it, and that's it, and I can go and write it as property, or does it need text on it? Or how much of the drawing has to be?
So how much do you have to do to actually have a protectable, I'm guessing, that's the implication of the protectable character. And the answer is you could register anything as long as it's registered copyright and something that's minimally creative, but for a trademark right, we can really get into this here
This is
because
true.
we've been leaning into the copyright side. Trademarks are different, they're not copyright, they're there to protect a brand identity specifically. Coca-Cola, Spider-Man, are all brands, and Spider-Man is a copyrighted character as well as a trademark. But the quick and down and dirty answer is that if you want to protect the copyright in your character so no one can take a look at that character and then draw something that looks like that character, then you just need to draw the character and register the copyright with the government. It's very simple to do that. There's a lot of exceptions to what I said because if it's a very generic character, if it's just somebody who looks
Stick
like
figure.
then it's
Stick figures.
yeah.
Yeah.
Not gonna get.
So the more detail, the more protection. If that makes sense. Yeah.
On the character agreement side,
Yes.
you're working for a large publisher, you create a character and you want them to take that character from a new title and make it something else. Is the agreement more like a licensing agreement? You go to the publisher and say, hey, I'd like to do this, and then they license it out to you, or how does that work?
It's not like
No, yeah. What it is they own the character 100%, right? They can put that character in whatever book they want, but if that character is manifested in another form of media, that company can, if they choose to do so, then reward you and whoever else co-created the character with, money, as appreciation for you doing this. And I can tell you, you think the thing about those is you just never know which character will hit. Like, I know a guy that co-created a version of a character that was created in the 70s, and he told me one day he got a FedEx envelope with a letter from a company and a check. And that check saved his ass. You just never know. So even if it's like you think it's the dumbest character, like Plant Protector, get a character
Is it like
swear to God.
Is it like a
you see a
discretionary
few of them?
royalty?
Yes, yeah, what you.
They have a spot in
Yeah,
there.
so it's the company saying, hey man, just really love your character. I mean, just to be clear, it's ours.
100%.
But hey man, if we decide to with only these properties right here, we will pay you a little bit more. But honestly, thanks so much.
Yep.
Right? That's what it is.
Here's a little
Yeah, but it's
compensation.
not about ownership. It's only about we're going to give you a little more sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm from Artemation Studios. I trademarked my company a while back,
but I have a character that I've been using for like years now. So would I be filing that copyright underneath my brand that's trademarked already, or are those like two separate things that I need to copyright as itself?
So I'm gonna avoid giving legal advice and answering that.
Right.
So,
No legal advice,
so,
but
right.
like in the
So
order.
what hypothetically, conceptually separate a trademark right from a copyright, right? And so assuming that that the hypothetical person had the right to create and own, all of this stuff, then the trademark aspect, that is the aspect that protects your company, trademarks basically say to the world, hey guys, when you see this, think of this company. Think of this great. That's what a trademark does. When you see the Coca-Cola logo, you know the quality of the soda that's inside. That's trademark. Copyright is, don't copy my stuff, man. That's copyright.
You've got that right.
Yeah, and so the trademark rights actually start with use. So if you're branding your company with the Spider-Man logo, and the more you use that as that one look of Spider-Man, not all of Spider-Man's trademark, it's just a distinctive, the oval face, or there's only several different poses of Spider-Man because it's very specific. These words, this image has this brand association. So trademark rights, you start by using them, then you register. Copyright, you start with creation, and then you register.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, over here in the boxes.
Yeah, quick question. Like, what are the pitfalls, if any, if someone was to play with, like, let's say, a public domain character?
The only pitfall in
If-
playing with a public domain, and for those of you who aren't aware, excellent use of the term, public domain means it no longer has a copyright. And just FYI, anything you create today by yourself, 70 years after your death is when that copyright expires. Unless it's a work for hire, in which case it's 120 years or 90 years from publication, whichever is shorter. And that being said, the public domain characters, if you use them in your work, go for it. The only thing is you can't stop other people from using those same public domain characters in their work. So just know if you hang everything on Steamboat Willie, you're gonna get some pushback. The wiggling hand got it. Go for it.
Related to that Steamboat Willie thing, recently Morgan & Morgan sued Disney because they used the Steamboat Willie version of Mickey in one of their advertisements, even though Disney hadn't actually raised a fuss, at least not from I know. So you think this is kind of like wagging me in front of a dog on a leash?
What I think it is a difference between copyright and trademark. One of the things that you have to be very careful in parsing the distinction between these two things, Steamboat Willie is used as a trademark of the Walt Disney Company, and that is not public domain. However, the copyrightable aspect of Steamboat Willie, if you wanted to do Steamboat Willie, goes manga, and you draw that as a book, you could do that now. But what you couldn't do is have that published by Steamboat Willie Publishing, right? Because that would be the trademark one. So it depends upon the rights. Okay. Big Crow. Crow?
No, I'm Gaster from Undertale.
Okay. Okay. So, yes.
So I'm an illustrator, so I'm familiar with the process that is required to copyright like the specific illustration, like the image. How does that differ from like copyrighting a character? Would I go through like the same avenues for that, or is like there a different resource that I go to?
You register the copyright through the Copyright Office, whether it's text or whether it's a movie, and that's at copyright.gov. The more nuanced answer, right? So you register your artwork that way. But your question is the character. I'm talking about the character, which is a combination, presumably, of literary components and visual components, right? So the best way to do that is register that in a full work in which that character is expressed, like a comic. But character rights, I could do a whole panel, and indeed I do a 3-hour law course on character rights, and they're so complex. I'm just know I'm kind of staying on this level of generality, not to sound like a shameless self-promoter. Okay, I am. But I go into detail in the book about character rights. Okay, and John Payne, I think, is what you look
Yeah, okay. We haven't really got into AI so much, but I want to throw out a hypothetical, and I'm not a plant, but I have some props and some other things. Okay, so work for hire. I'm coming in as I'm not an LLC. I'm coming in as just a freelance guy. Say, comic book company is hiring me to produce a mini, right?
Yep.
So they are giving me a model sheet, which I'm showing you right here, right?
Right.
So I'm taking this model sheet, and they're going, oh, and we need this tomorrow. And you go,